The pencil trembled slightly as Uniffizier Verrier Burkhardt wrote in his hidden diary, recording thoughts he never would have shared openly. The Americans must be exaggerating. No nation could maintain such abundance while engaged in a global conflict, he wrote. Through the train window, he had just witnessed something that contradicted years of official messaging. Electric lights glowed from every farmhouse, every street corner, every shop window. An uninterrupted constellation stretching across the Texas plains late into the night. In his homeland, regulations and resource shortages had darkened cities and towns for years. Rural electrification had reached only a portion of the countryside. Yet here in a nation often portrayed as struggling, electricity seemed to flow everywhere, effortlessly. 850 experienced soldiers from the North African campaign stepped down from the passenger train. Not freight wagons, but cushioned Pullman coaches with dining services and sleeping berths. The entire community of Mexia had gathered to witness their arrival. What none of them realized was that this moment would spark one of the most profound psychological shifts of the era, an unexpected reevaluation of long-held beliefs, driven not by force, but by the overwhelming display of American industrial capacity. The foundations of victory were being written not only on battlefields, but in production numbers that would soon challenge everything they thought they knew about their opponents. The collapse of their forces in North Africa had begun on May 13, 1943, in Tunisia. General Jürgen von Arnim surrendered along with approximately 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian personnel. The numbers grew as scattered units laid down arms over several days. Many of the most experienced veterans, men who had once pushed British forces back to Egypt and had earned the respect of opposing commanders, were suddenly captives. Among them was Captain Friedrich Rathke, decorated for bravery and twice wounded in earlier campaigns. His diary, preserved decades later in the National Archives, would help historians understand the psychological journey these men experienced. Their path from defeat to unexpected insight began in the port of Oran, Algeria. As Rathke and 30,000 others waited in temporary holding areas for transport ships, the organization of their captors began reshaping their assumptions. The U.S. Army processed thousands daily with a level of efficiency that exceeded anything they had previously witnessed. Identification cards were prepared and filed. Medical exams were completed. Inoculations were administered. Their rights under the Geneva Convention were explained clearly in fluent German by officers trained specifically for this purpose. But the first major surprise came with the food. A soldier named Hans Müller wrote to his family months later, "While we waited for transport in Oran, the meals we received were better than anything we had eaten in the final stages of the desert campaign. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. At first we thought it was meant to impress us, but we later realized these were standard military rations. The Liberty ships that would carry them across the Atlantic were themselves symbols of American industrial scale." The SS Robert E. Peary had famously been assembled in just over 4 days at the Kaiser shipyards in California, a feat that would have been dismissed as impossible if they had heard it earlier. At peak production, 3 such ships were completed every day, returning from supply missions to Europe. Rather than travel back empty, they now carried human cargo, up to 30,000 prisoners each month by the summer of 1943. The 2-week Atlantic crossing provided the next stage of reevaluation. The 2-week Atlantic crossing in July 1943 marked the second chapter of this unexpected transformation. Sergeant Kurt Zimmerman, who later described the experience in letters preserved after the war, observed details that challenged his assumptions. He noted that the ship's crew disposed of more unused food each day than his entire company had received in weekly rations during their final months in North Africa. The sailors set aside food that had gone untouched: bread, milk, even meat, not to make a point, simply because it was surplus. Their supplies seemed endless, he wrote. These ships became moving classrooms of American industrial capability. Prisoners learned from friendly conversations with crew members that the vessel carrying them was one of 2,110 Liberty ships built during the war, each assembled from 250,000 parts manufactured across 32 states. The engines they discovered had been manufactured in multiple specialized plants, each producing powerful components that were then assembled in coastal shipyards that had barely existed a few years earlier. This level of coordination left a deep impression on men who had come from a system strained by shortages. Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Stobern, from a long-established Prussian family, later wrote, "As our ship approached the American coast, I saw a rotating antenna atop the bridge. Equipment we believed was limited to only a few nations, yet here it was on a cargo vessel." It was then that I first suspected the conflict's direction had already been decided. On August 2, 1943, the ship entered Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia, a site that challenged everything these men thought they knew about American industry. The Norfolk complex stretched across thousands of acres. Its docks reached far into the harbor. Cranes moved constantly, unloading and loading ships at a speed that surpassed the capacity of many major European ports. Johann Weber, who had worked in a factory before being drafted, counted 47 cargo ships in the harbor. Each crane lifted cargo with a smoothness and speed that would have required dozens of workers back home. The machinery operated with electric power rather than the coal systems common in Europe. As the prisoners were organized into columns to board waiting trains, they passed parking lots filled with civilian automobiles, hundreds of them belonging to dock workers. Back in Germany, personal vehicles were still considered a luxury. A widely promoted affordable car had never reached mass production. Here, ordinary workers commuted in their own vehicles each day. But nothing prepared them for the trains themselves. These were not freight wagons or the cramped cars they were familiar with. Instead, full passenger coaches awaited them, Pullman cars with padded seats that converted into sleeping berths. There were dining cars with table service and observation cars with panoramic windows. Captain Radke wrote, "We boarded like travelers, not captives." Even the guards seemed almost apologetic about the comfort, one noting that the air conditioning was not working as well as usual. The 3-day journey from Norfolk to the camps of Texas and Oklahoma would become one of the most revealing experiences for the men on board. As the trains moved through Virginia, the passengers pressed their faces against the windows, taking in a landscape that defied everything they expected. Every small town glowed with widespread electric lighting. Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro, places that, in Europe, might have had only a handful of street lamps, displayed illuminated shop windows, bright signage, and homes lit from multiple rooms. The trains passed factories running late shifts, their windows glowing, parking lots full even near midnight. Hans Muller, whose father had held a local administrative role back home, later wrote, "We passed through dozens of towns that night. Each seemed brighter than the largest city in my region." The guards told us this was normal, that most American communities had enjoyed full electrification for decades. At first, I didn't believe them. In Roanoke, Virginia, the train paused briefly for coal and water. The prisoners watched as railway workers performed tasks in 30 minutes that would have taken far longer in Germany. Automated loaders, electric pumps, mechanized systems, all functioning with a level of efficiency that left a strong impression. Even more striking was the everyday comfort of the workers themselves. Many wore sturdy boots, drank bottled soft drinks, and casually discarded items that would have been carefully preserved back home. Feldwebel Heinrich Müller, an electrical technician before the war, estimated that the rail yard consumed more electricity in 1 hour than an entire district of Berlin used in a full day. Lights glowed in empty rooms, as though energy were limitless, he noted. As the trains crossed into Tennessee and Kentucky, American industrial power became even more apparent. Through the windows, the passengers saw expansive factories, each one larger than most they had ever encountered. The Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee stretched for miles along a riverbank. Its electric furnaces consumed vast amounts of power, more than many major German cities at the time. Near Louisville, the trains slowed as they passed the Rubbertown complex, massive synthetic rubber facilities built from open fields in just 18 months. These plants employed thousands of workers and produced hundreds of thousands of tons annually. A former chemist named Erich Hoffman recognized the advanced equipment immediately. Each facility was more modern than anything we had constructed, and there were several of them in one place, he later recalled. Just beyond Louisville, the trains continued past Ford's Willow Run plant near Detroit, a factory so large it was visible from miles away. Built in only 9 months, the plant had achieved rates of production unmatched anywhere in the world, assembling aircraft at remarkable speed using parts manufactured by hundreds of suppliers across the nation. As the trains drew closer to Detroit, Captain Whirl, an aviator before his capture, watched closely through the window. He counted aircraft in various stages of assembly. "We had been told these machines were poorly made," he later wrote, "but I could see the precision and scale of the production lines. The work was far more advanced than anything we had imagined." The deeper the trains traveled into the American interior, the more evident it became that the efficiency they were witnessing was not exceptional. It was normal. In St. Louis, the train crossed the Mississippi River on the historic Eads Bridge. Below the bridge, barges carried enormous quantities of grain, moved with a level of efficiency that surpassed anything most of the men had seen in their lifetime. Warehouses and grain elevators lined both shores, structures capable of storing enough food to supply large cities for months. Carl Schmidt, the son of a farmer from Bavaria, wrote in his journal, "The scale of their food distribution is unlike anything we knew. One barge carried what would have supplied my entire village for years." At Kansas City, the train passed a vast stockyard where thousands of cattle were gathered. The air carried the scent of major food processing plants, and workers could be seen eating generously prepared meals during their breaks. Paul Fisher noted, "They ate with a variety and abundance we had rarely seen. A guard bought us sandwiches from a nearby stand. Meat, cheese, vegetables, simple, affordable, and readily available." The arrival at the camps introduced the next chapter of their experience. Camp Hearn in Texas, completed in just 4 months, housed several thousand prisoners in conditions many found unexpectedly stable and organized. The wooden barracks were equipped with electric lighting, heated water, and basic amenities that resembled those found in many American communities at the time. The camp hospital left a particular impression on visitors. Dr. Friedrich Bauer, a senior medical officer among the prisoners, found equipment and supplies that surpassed what had been available in many European civilian facilities by the mid-war period. They had modern diagnostic equipment and medical supplies that had become scarce in Europe, he wrote. Patients received attentive care, including treatments that were considered advanced for the era. The camp kitchens revealed even more about American food systems. Prisoners assigned to kitchen duty discovered refrigerated storage rooms, electric mixers, large capacity ovens, and organized systems designed to feed thousands efficiently. Otto Krebs, once a hotel chef, noted in his diary, "The quantities prepared amazed us. Regulations required extra portions to ensure no one went without. Any remaining surplus, still perfectly good, was simply set aside. It was the first time many of us saw food treated as an abundant resource." By late summer 1943, a shortage of agricultural labor in the United States led to a program allowing supervised groups of prisoners to assist on farms and in processing facilities. This decision, made out of practical necessity, offered the prisoners an even broader look at American productivity. Groups of prisoners were transported daily to work sites across the American heartland. They traveled without blindfolds or restricted routes, giving them an unfiltered view of the country, its fields, factories, and communities. They saw expansive farmland, small towns with busy shops, and industrial plants operating day and night. The contrast between scarcity back home and the abundance they witnessed left a deep impression. At a cotton gin outside Houston, Herbert Lang watched a single machine process more cotton in 1 hour than his entire village could handle in a month. The facility drew power from a regional electrification program that had brought modern utilities to nearly all Texas farms by 1943. The farmer operating the gin was an ordinary citizen, Lang later wrote. He had electricity, running water, modern vehicles, and equipment we had never seen in such widespread use, and every farm we passed was similar. In Nebraska, prisoners assisted in sugar beet fields and saw agricultural machinery capable of performing work that once required large teams of laborers. The size of the fields alone astonished many, stretching far into the horizon, larger than entire regions of farmland in Europe. Farmers spoke casually about crop yields that seemed extraordinary by European standards. Wilhelm Hoffman, working on a farm near Scottsbluff, noted that even teenagers could operate tractors worth more than everything his family had owned. When Hoffman mentioned this, the farmer's son replied lightheartedly that the machine wasn't even the most modern model. Another was expected to arrive soon, with even greater capability. The most profound insights came to those assigned to work near American factories. While international rules prevented them from working directly on war materials, They were allowed to assist in industries that supported the broader economy, freeing American workers for military production. This exposed thousands of prisoners to the scale and speed of American manufacturing. At a food processing plant in New Jersey, they observed automated systems that handled more produce in a single day than many European facilities processed in a month. Ernst Wagner, who had worked in food production before the war, described what he witnessed. Everything was automated: conveyor belts, filling machines, steam cookers managing hundreds of containers at a time. One operator oversaw work that would have required dozens of people back home. Near Detroit, groups assigned to unload coal at a power plant glimpsed the vast River Rouge industrial complex across the water, an enormous network of factories producing vehicles, engines, and essential machinery. The facility consumed large amounts of electricity daily, greater than the usage of major European cities at the time. Parking lots filled with workers' personal cars stretched as far as the eye could see. Franz Kettner wrote, "We were told that personal vehicles were rare in America, but here we saw thousands. Many workers owned more than one. It was a visible sign of prosperity and independence." By late 1943, American analysts monitoring the camps began documenting a noticeable change in the perspectives of many prisoners. After months of seeing America's productivity firsthand, long-held assumptions were quietly being reevaluated. Reports noted that the prisoners, especially those with technical backgrounds, had become increasingly interested in American newspapers, books, and educational materials. They wanted to understand the systems that produce such efficiency. Major Paul Newland, part of a monitoring team, wrote in December 1943, "The discussions have shifted. Many prisoners now compare what they see with what they once believed. Their interest in the workings of American society has grown steadily." The camp newspapers, written and edited by prisoners, also began reflecting this shift. Titles like Der Ruf, The Call, published at Fort Kearny, gradually moved away from defiant nationalism and toward discussions about economics, democratic governance, and post-war reconstruction. The editors chosen for their balanced perspectives found their readership increasingly receptive to new ideas. Letters home show that many prisoners were comparing their past expectations with the day-to-day reality they now witnessed. Lieutenant Herman Gutz wrote, "We have been told that American society lacks structure and unity. But every day we see an organized system that functions efficiently and treats people fairly." A significant turning point came after Italy's armistice in September 1943. Italian prisoners who agreed to cooperate were organized into service units, given improved conditions, and allowed greater freedom. German prisoners observed their former allies working alongside Americans, eating in local establishments, and even forming friendships within the community. For many, this was the first time they had seen such openness toward former opponents. Captain Friedrich Schultz wrote, "The way the Americans interact with the Italians surprised us. They treat them with respect, even though their countries had been on opposite sides. It made many of us reconsider ideas we had once taken for granted." The holiday season of 1943 deepened this reflection. American civic groups, churches, and community organizations sent hundreds of thousands of holiday packages to the prisoners, containing small gifts, toiletries, and food items. Local choirs visited the camps to perform seasonal music. Families from nearby towns sent in baked goods. Even though regulations limited direct interactions, these gestures resonated deeply with many prisoners. Lieutenant Walter Muller wrote, "Many here have loved ones serving far from home, yet they choose to show kindness even to us. Their confidence and sense of humanity are unlike anything we expected to find." The holiday meal itself left a lasting impression. Tables were filled with turkey, vegetables, baked goods, and desserts, quantities of food many prisoners had not seen since before the war. Many prisoners later described the 1943 holiday celebration as one of the most memorable moments of their captivity. The meal, prepared by American staff, included dishes that reflected the generosity and abundance common in the United States during festive seasons. Hans Zeiler, an infantry sergeant, wrote, "The amount of food, the variety, and the care put into the preparation surprised us. The guards explained that this was a normal holiday tradition for American families." By early 1944, interest in educational opportunities offered within the camps had grown significantly. More than 40,000 prisoners enrolled in classes ranging from English and mathematics to economics and American civics. Universities supported these programs by sending books, correspondence courses, and occasionally visiting lecturers. The University of Chicago, Stanford, and other institutions provided academic material that broadened many prisoners' understanding of the world. The camp libraries were well stocked, offering access to newspapers, novels, scientific texts, and magazines. For many, it was the first time they had been able to explore multiple viewpoints freely. Dr. Wilhelm von Braun, a physicist before the war, participated in scientific lectures at Camp Shelby. He later wrote, "The instructors treated us as students, not adversaries. They emphasized that knowledge belonged to all humanity and should be shared." The camp theaters showed American films, popular productions that depicted various aspects of the country's history and culture. These films offered a nuanced look at American society, including stories of resilience, social challenges, and recovery. One group watched Gone with the Wind and commented on its depiction of adversity and rebuilding. Another screening, The Grapes of Wrath, led prisoners to discuss how openly Americans portrayed societal difficulties and economic hardship. Lieutenant Joseph Kramer wrote, "The openness with which Americans discussed their own problems was surprising. Films showed both strengths and struggles. This transparency seemed to make their society more resilient." By the spring of 1944, many prisoners were involved in supervised labor that supported the agricultural and industrial needs of the United States during the war. These assignments provided yet another view of the country's vast productive capabilities. At a boat manufacturing plant in New Orleans, prisoners helped unload materials. They observed teams of workers assembling landing craft with remarkable speed and coordination, producing hundreds per month to meet growing global demands. Sergeant Kurt Zimmerman, who assisted at the site, wrote in a camp newsletter, "We saw people from all backgrounds working together, men, women, and young workers, contributing to the same goal. The pace never slowed, day or night." Further north, steel plants operated continuously to meet the increasing need for raw materials. The scale of production impressed even those with professional experience. Paul Hartman, who had worked at a major steelworks in Germany, remarked that he had never seen furnaces of such magnitude. At the Higgins boat plant in New Orleans, the sight of coordinated production left a lasting impact. Workers assembled hundreds of landing craft each month, each one composed of thousands of individual components. Teams operated around the clock, contributing to a global effort that required extraordinary precision. Zimmerman later wrote, "We saw people of all skill levels involved, crane operators, welders, technicians, and support staff. The teamwork was constant, and the output seemed almost limitless." In Ohio, prisoners assigned to nearby support tasks observed large-scale steel production. At one facility, furnaces produced more steel in a day than some major plants in Europe could generate in a week. Paul Hartman, with prior experience at a well-known steel company, noted, "The speed and volume of production were beyond anything I had seen before." The workers discussed improvements, efficiency, and safety as routine topics. By the summer of 1944, agricultural work offered another window into America's productive strength. Across the Midwest, prisoners witnessed harvests of remarkable scale, fields stretching across the horizon, with machines capable of working dozens of acres per hour. Franz Weber, a farmer's son from East Prussia, described watching a single harvester collect more grain in a day than most family farms produced in an entire season. In Kansas, grain elevators filled rapidly. Each structure held quantities of wheat that could supply entire cities. Workers spoke casually about yields and production levels that seemed extraordinary from a European perspective. Weber wrote, "These farms produced on a scale we had never imagined possible. The efficiency, machinery, and organization showed what modern agriculture could achieve." Further west, in California's Central Valley, prisoners worked in orchards and fruit processing areas. They saw modern irrigation systems, carefully managed farmland, and fruit harvests so large that surplus produce was sometimes set aside to maintain stable prices. For prisoners who came from regions affected by shortages, the sight of such abundance was difficult to reconcile. Many noted the contrast between the needs of their families back home and the vast capacity they now witnessed. Otto Schultz wrote, "The field seemed endless. We saw fruit that had minor imperfections being set aside, not because it lacked quality, but simply because there was already more than enough." He added that the scale of available resources illustrated the confidence of a nation with considerable reserves. In early June 1944, news reached the camps of a major Allied landing in Western Europe. The scale of the operation, thousands of ships, aircraft, and personnel, reinforced what many prisoners had already begun to understand. At Camp Shelby, prisoners watched newsreels showing extensive logistical operations, artificial harbors, supply lines, and the vast forces involved. For many, this confirmed the extraordinary organizational capacity of the United States and its allies. As the summer of 1944 progressed, many prisoners realized that the scale of the ongoing operations in Western Europe far exceeded earlier expectations. The newsreels they watched showed ships moving supplies across the English Channel and aircraft providing support over the coastline, all part of a coordinated effort of unprecedented size. For the men at Camp Shelby, these images highlighted a level of organization and preparation that reflected years of planning, vast resources, and teamwork across multiple nations. Johann von Tobin later wrote, We had underestimated the extent to which the United States and its allies could mobilize. The logistical displays were beyond anything we had anticipated. Throughout their time in the camps, the prisoners were consistently shown a level of treatment grounded in dignity and structure. This approach surprised many who had expected a harsher environment, especially those who had arrived with deeply rooted assumptions about their captors. When news arrived from Europe about events affecting prisoners' families, camp officials often delivered the information personally. In one case, a camp commander met with a soldier who had received difficult family news and offered support in time away from regular duties. Lieutenant Paul Fisher recalled that when his wife wrote about struggling to provide for their children back home, American community organizations arranged to send assistance through international relief groups. To him, this demonstrated a distinction he had not expected, that compassion could extend across borders even in times of conflict. Hauptmann Otto wrote, "They made clear that their concerns were directed at the policies of governments, not at ordinary people. The respect shown toward us, even in captivity, reshaped many of our assumptions." Medical care in the camps continued to surprise newly arrived prisoners. Facilities were well supplied, and German medical personnel often worked alongside American staff, learning new techniques and using equipment that had become scarce in Europe. Support for emotional well-being was also present. Camp doctors and counselors provided assistance to those struggling with stress and uncertainty, an approach uncommon in many armies at the time. By early 1945, educational initiatives had expanded further. Over 25,000 prisoners had enrolled in classes on democracy, economics, agriculture, and modern industry. Camp newspapers featured articles discussing civic responsibility, reconstruction, and future development. Some prisoners, once committed to rigid ideological structures, now wrote essays proposing how their country could rebuild, improve productivity, and adopt more inclusive systems after the war. Officers who had previously resisted these ideas began to participate in discussions about modernizing agriculture, energy use, and community development, many inspired by what they had witnessed firsthand in the United States. Oberst Hermann Goetz later said in a 1975 interview, "We were changed not by pressure, but by observation. We saw ordinary people living with opportunity and stability. We wanted to understand how such a system worked." Some prisoners even requested permission to remain in the United States after the war, hoping to continue studying or working. Others formed friendships with American families through correspondence programs, a connection that often continued for decades. By the spring of 1945, many educational programs inside the camps had reached extraordinary levels of participation. Discussion groups debated civic principles, the structure of democratic institutions, and how a future, stable society could be rebuilt after the conflict. In April 1945, news from Europe began showing the realities of the war's final months. As reports and documentation emerged from the liberated areas, prisoners confronted information that was shocking to many of them. The contrast between the values they saw in American communities and the events being reported from Europe was profound. Newsreels and official documentation were shown in camp theaters. Many prisoners responded with disbelief at first, but as additional testimony and verified reports arrived, the full scope of the situation became clearer. Captain Walter Schmidt wrote a reflection that captured the feeling of many. We realized we had placed our trust in ideas that had not reflected the reality we now saw. What we witnessed in America, stability, openness, and humane treatment, contradicted much of what we once believed. As the war ended in May 1945, prisoners prepared for their return home with mixed emotions. They had spent years in a country whose prosperity, infrastructure, and social systems had reshaped their understanding of the modern world. American authorities offered vocational training, agricultural instruction, and educational resources to help ease the transition. Many learned about upcoming international efforts to support European recovery, which gave them hope for rebuilding their communities. Oberst Friedrich von Tauben wrote, "They encouraged us to think about how we could contribute to our country's renewal. They shared knowledge, skills, and ideas that would become essential after we returned home." Between 1945 and 1946, more than 370,000 German prisoners were repatriated from camps across the United States. They returned to a homeland facing significant challenges, but they brought with them new perspectives shaped by what they had seen. Many later became influential figures in the reconstruction of post-war Germany. Some entered agriculture, others industry, education, or politics. Their exposure to American systems helped guide their contributions to rebuilding their country. Hans Kroll, once detained at Camp Shelby, later served as West Germany's ambassador to the United States. Walter Hallstein, who participated in educational activities, became the first president of the European Commission. Others played key roles in economic redevelopment and institutional renewal. Their efforts contributed to what would later be known as the economic miracle of the 1950s, an era driven in part by ideas and practices observed during their time in America. Hans Kroll wrote, "We learned that stability and prosperity grow from openness, opportunity, and a commitment to improving society for everyone." Historians have described the prisoner experience in America as one of the most effective educational programs of the era. Not because of persuasion, but because of what the prisoners observed directly. Dr. Arnold Kramer, a leading historian on this topic, concluded, "America's influence came not from rhetoric, but from the everyday reality of a society built on opportunity, cooperation, and respect." Statistics help illustrate the scale of this experience. Hundreds of camps across the United States, millions of hours of labor supporting the economy, and tens of thousands of educational enrollments. Fewer than 1% of prisoners attempted escape, and nearly all of them were recaptured quickly, an indication of the overall stability of the system and the generally constructive environment within the camps. Surveys showed that a vast majority rated their treatment as positive, and many maintained friendships with American families through letters for decades. In 1985, hundreds of former prisoners and their families returned to Texas for a reunion, where they shared memories and reflected on how those years had shaped their lives. Hans Wehr, who later became a physician in Maine, spoke at the event. "We discovered everyday comforts and opportunities we had never known. For many of us, those camp years opened our eyes to a different kind of future." Another former prisoner, Kurt Miller, recalled, "The farmers who hosted work details welcomed us as young men far from home. Their kindness left a lasting impression." At the reunion dinner, Oberst Hermann Gutz delivered the keynote address. We arrived in America with rigid beliefs. We left with a new understanding of what a modern, open society could achieve. He continued, we saw communities built on cooperation, productivity, and opportunity. The strength we witnessed came not from force, but from the ability to create, innovate, and work together. We returned home determined to build a society focused on progress and stability, one that valued opportunity over division. The auditorium rose in applause as former adversaries stood side by side, united by shared experiences and a commitment to a better future. The scale of the American program can be measured in impressive numbers: hundreds of camps, millions of hours of productive labor, and a repatriation process that returned hundreds of thousands of individuals to Europe prepared to help rebuild. The infrastructure alone was vast, with camps established across nearly every state. Construction was rapid, efficient, and standardized. Prisoner populations grew rapidly from 1943 onward, and work assignments, carefully chosen to comply with international agreements, provided essential support to American farms and industries. Educational programs thrived, with tens of thousands enrolling in classes or vocational training. Newspapers produced within the camps offered thoughtful discussions on economics, politics, and future development. Many former prisoners later returned to the United States as visitors or immigrants. Friendships formed through correspondence programs endured for decades. Most prisoners later described their experience as a life-changing, and many credited their time in America with inspiring new paths in their professional and personal lives. Ideological rigidity diminished as first-hand experience replaced earlier assumptions. Exposure to American society, its abundance, its openness, its emphasis on opportunity, reshaped how many saw the modern world. In many ways, the transformation that occurred within the camps represented a victory not achieved on battlefields, but through example, through productivity, stability, and humane treatment. The prisoners had arrived believing in American weakness. They left recognizing American strength, not merely in industry, but in spirit. The trains that brought them to the camps carried soldiers shaped by one worldview. The ships that returned them home carried individuals ready to contribute to a new era of peace and reconstruction. Their experiences demonstrated a powerful truth, that the most enduring influence comes not from coercion, but from the everyday evidence of how a free society functions. In that transformation lay the foundations of partnership, reconstruction, and a stable post-war future. The post-war recovery of Germany was built not only by policies and aid programs, but by the experiences of those who had witnessed firsthand how cooperation, innovation, and opportunity could shape a nation. Those who once arrived as adversaries left as individuals determined to build a better future, an outcome shaped by the example they had observed. Their children grew up in a democratic Germany aligned with the United States, a partnership rooted in decades of shared progress. The story of their time in America is ultimately a story of renewal, proof that understanding can lead to transformation and that dignity can inspire lasting change. It shows that meaningful victories often come not from conflict, but from cooperation, not from division, but from opportunity. The men who witnessed American society during those years returned home with a message that helped shape one of history's most successful recoveries. Their journey from soldiers shaped by ideology to individuals inspired by opportunity remains one of the most remarkable transformations of the era. In the end, America's greatest strength was not its weaponry, but the everyday reality of a society built on innovation, abundance, and the belief that progress is possible for all. And in that example, they found the foundation for a better future.